Hello! Yes, I know. I'm not actually here right now. I'm driving a Chevrolet Bolt EV belonging to Winter and his partner from the east coast of the US all the way back to the west coast. Such are the wonders of the internet that I get to make a video even when I'm not here. I have a pretty amazing job. Not only do I get to work with a truly amazing team of talented and wonderful people that I consider both my colleagues and my friends, but I also get to make videos about something I really love. Cleaner, greener, safer, and smarter transportation. Most of the time, I and the rest of the team make videos about the latest news here at the studio, providing context, background, and hopefully some useful insights. Sometimes we'll get a chance to cover a car launch, which is a really fun experience involving travel to some interesting places, meeting some super cool people, and seeing some really wonderful parts of the world. That said, it can also be very tiring. And launches can be a lot of extra work on top of the usual daily production schedule. And frankly, as an introvert, it's very draining, both physically and emotionally. Yep. While you might think I am pretty outgoing on camera, I'm actually quite the introvert. In fact, I tend to feel out of my comfort zone at most car events I go to. Some people like crowds, some people like to hobnob, and they love the whole social aspect of a car launch. I frankly either spend my entire time nervously talking too much to people, or I have incredible bouts of imposter syndrome and worry that someone's going to find out I am actually a total fake at my job. Which usually means I end up hiding away and talking one-on-one to people. And I also try and sneak long, complicated chats with the engineers who are responsible for bringing cars to market. Frankly, asking questions about the inner workings of a new car design is my favourite bit of launches, unless there's driving involved. It also helps me to calm down. Yet, without a doubt, the best bit of my job, and the one I don't get to do all that much, is getting to drive a car for a while, figuring out what I think about it, and then turning that into a car review for you guys to watch. But how exactly do we get to go to launch events, and how do we go about getting cars and then making a review? Some folks clearly think, from their comments, that we are little more than an advertising mouthpiece for car companies that lend us the car. Others think we are actually paid to do reviews. And some think that we're part of some dark cabal that exists to further the destruction of the planet by encouraging the burning of fossil fuels and prolonging the inevitable end of humankind. Seriously though, none of those are true. Which is why I thought it might be a good time to tell you just how we go about making a car review, from what's involved through to the final process. Firstly, I just want to clear something up. Like any content we produce on this channel, we have no skin in the game when it comes to reviews. We don't take any payment from anyone to make a review. We don't give an automaker any special preview of the video, and we most definitely do not change our editorial views to suit some kind of hidden agenda. Because they're reviews though, they will, by the very definition of the term review, mean that some subjectivity will come into play. And whoever is doing the review will be influenced by how much they enjoyed their time behind the wheel. Everyone who's into cars has cars they love and cars they hate, and they're rarely the same as the next person's. But honestly, there's absolutely no hidden agendas here. So let's cut to the chase. How exactly do we get cars in the first place to review? And how easy is it to get our hands on a car? Car companies in different countries have different approaches to their press fleets, but for the most part, you have to be known to the car company as a journalist or content creator, and that usually means having some kind of contact at the automaker. But to answer this question in an in-depth manner, I need to actually divert to tell you a little bit about car launch events, and most importantly, how they differ from getting your hands on a review car. Car launches are big events for every single automaker, and usually they involve a significant amount of pre-event press, embargoed materials, and briefings. But exactly who gets a chance to attend these events is a bit hit and miss. At one point, getting access to a press event was all about having a good working relationship with the press team at the automaker in question, which meant knowing who they were, reaching out with questions rather than just making clickbait content, and trying to be a decent human being. When car launches and press events were handled in-house, knowing who was at each automaker was essential. And because the auto industry PR world is frankly extremely small, staying on track of who was leaving their job at one company and heading to another was kind of vital. Having a good, respectful working relationship with the press team usually meant you'd hear about events, get a chance to go on them, and see a car firsthand. But to be clear, a good working relationship didn't mean saying just nice things. It meant being fair, objective, and honest. Even if you had something negative to say, as long as you had a valid reason to do so, you were generally fine. These days, most car launch events are handled by external PR firms, hired in to deal with specific events. Once you're actually there, some of the automaker's own in-house PR team might be there, but picking and choosing who gets to go is much more of a roulette wheel than it once was. Traditional print media and linear TV still get reasonably predictable access, but websites and content creators? It's another thing. The reasons for this are pretty varied, but it boils down to the way that many automakers view digital content creators, be they text or video-based. Automotive YouTube has gotten a lot of bad rep over the years thanks to generally rich people doing dumb things with cars for the views. And that's hung over everyone in the space. In fact, it's something Doug DeMuro has talked about a few times. I'll leave a link up here and in the description for a video in which he covers the process of both attending launch events and the painful process of trying to get his hands on a review vehicle. Today, launch event invites are sometimes down to luck. Sometimes external PR firms will invite you based on you having a popular video that had high viewer engagement. Sometimes, though, they don't even understand who you are, but just happened across a video that they happen to like. And other times, it's more of a balanced decision-making process. But sometimes, your invitation is an uncomfortable thing. On several occasions, I've had external agencies reach out and ask me or someone from the team to go on a car launch event, unaware of what the channel does or what they do, and eager to have someone from the channel there as an influencer, only to discover that we're not influencers, but we are journalists. You might think that's not so much of a big problem, but it can be. Influencers are usually treated differently to journalists, and may or may not be required to sign influencer contracts designed to limit what other cars or other content the influencer can cover in a set period of time, which of course is something we would refuse to do. In one particular instance, I was invited by an external agency, then asked to sign a contract for a car launch. It wasn't until I declined and reached out to the PR team for the car company, who I knew, that I was able to sort things out. So, yeah, some YouTubers go to events as influencers and they may or may not sign contracts. They're generally treated better than the journalists. We go as journalists and we never let the automaker have editorial control. Unfortunately, with more and more content creators out there who do fit the influencer bill, some, but not all automakers, are leaning heavily towards inviting YouTubers, TikTokers, and other social media influencers with large followings rather than traditional automotive journalists, because the former tend to know less about the industry and are more prone to being easily swayed and impressed in their opinions. But when car companies do invite journalists, the only thing that car company does is to cover transportation, accommodation, and food costs, and that's usually done by sending journalists tickets to get there, paying for their hotel bill, and some amount of wining and dining. Sometimes these can be nice, you know, the old press junket of old, but more often these days they're pretty basic. Which brings me to the different type of car reviews that we do. There's the on-launch review that usually involves a day or less with the car, and then the week-long review. I'll explain how we make both and how they differ. With the car review at launch, the time we get behind the wheel is really limited. Not only do we have to memorise a whole bunch of specs and quotes from the pre-driving briefing, often jet-lagged, but we also have a very limited amount of time to film. Furthermore, you can get as much as a few hours or as little as 30 minutes behind the wheel, and very often you're paired up with another journalist in the same car. It's for this reason that when we were based in the UK, and often ended up at events with the lovely Robert Llewellyn from Fully Charged, Robert and I would choose to share a car. He'd film for a bit, and then I'd film for a bit. And we understood what the other needed to do. Plus, we get on. Now we are on different sides of the world. Well, it can be a little bit hit and miss who you end up with. Sometimes you'll just be with a print journalist who just wants to drive the car and get to the lunch stop so they can chat with their colleagues. Sometimes you'll be with someone who's okay with you strapping cameras all over the car and taking half an hour before you're ready to leave. But most importantly, on an event like that, I, or whoever else is doing the launch coverage, is generally alone. We may have someone to help us with filming, but it's super rare. And that means our reviews are usually shorter, contain far less information, and are chock full of official automaker B-roll from the launch. To see a good example of this kind of launch video, check out this video from the original Chevrolet Bolt EV event. You'll see that the camera is cropped in-car weirdly, which meant that there was someone sitting next to me in the passenger seat. Of course, there are some exceptions. The Porsche Taycan launch event I went on was one journalist per car, but that's pretty rare and only usually takes place when the car company in question has a big enough budget to make it happen, or it has a really small guest list. For the record, when we get a quick drive of the car, we'll usually call that video a first impression or a quick drive, but when we have a longer period of time, we'll call that a review. Which brings me to the question of how we get our hands on a car for a review. Here in the US, most mainstream car companies send press cars to local specialist fleet operators who are then responsible for vetting and arranging loans of particular cars to local journalists. If you are a member of an official journalists' press association, I am here in the Pacific Northwest, it makes the whole process of asking for a car a lot easier. And instead of dealing with the automaker directly, you often just talk to the local fleet operator to see what's on their fleet at any given time. Obviously, they also need to know who you are, and you have to go through a verification to make sure that you are who you say you are the first time you work with them. And again, in this case, knowing your local fleet operators really helps with access to cars. They'll sometimes even put in a good word for the loan with the automaker in question. Ultimately though, it's also sometimes a bit hit and miss. Sometimes I miss out on an official press car because they're not here for very long, and sometimes the automaker is quite specific about who it wants to drive or not drive a car. Again, see the Doug DeMuro video I called out earlier to find out what it's actually like for an actual factual automotive YouTube channel to get a car, rather than some entertainment with cars YouTube channel. For new cars, I often reach out to a contact at the automaker in question and inquire about getting a review slot, because they're often limited. Sometimes the automaker, if it really wants you to drive its car, they sometimes do, reaches out to the local fleet operator and asks them to hook you up for a week. A slot is booked, and then you get, on average, a week with the car. Sometimes less, but normally a week. At which point, everything else swings into action. Aside from being around when the car arrives, you also need to have a week's worth of things planned. For us, this usually means bringing up the loan in the weekly planning meeting and making sure everyone knows what's going on. Kit, our social media guru, will then plan some content and ask whoever was with the car to grab some candid teaser shots, while the rest of us swing into action to figure out when and where filming can actually take place. As we're in the Pacific Northwest, another major pain for us is weather. While we try and plan reviews when the weather is nice, it's not always possible. The Volkswagen ID4 filming is a perfect example of this. It took place over 4 days when we had rain, bright sunshine, heavy wind, and overcast skies. So if you watch that video and you're curious as to why there seemed to be all 4 during that day, that's why. For me, as a car reviewer, I have to get some time behind the wheel. The first day the car is with me, I try and take it out to grab some first impressions, noting them down somewhere safe when I get back. Then as the week progresses, I'll try and grab some more time with the car, using it for every conceivable trip I need to do in order to really get a clue as to what the car is about. Most of the time, I try not to read the manual or do any heavy advanced preparation though, because I want to experience the car from a perspective of a first-timer who's buying the car. And usually, over the course of a few days, I'll figure out if my initial impressions were correct or if I was wrong. Very often, I was wrong. At this point, you're probably realising that reviewing the car in a week is a bit of a challenge, especially if you're producing daily content like we do on this channel and you have a small team. The driving and reviewing bit has to happen while we're doing all of the usual stuff we do for this channel, which means scripting, filming, editing and publishing 15 videos a week. We have 2 full-time members of staff and 3 part-timers. Now there's more people on the team, it is easier than it once was, but when there's a car here on review, whoever has the car doesn't get a whole lot of time off. By the time we are halfway through the loan, it is time to get B-roll. That's camera footage that shows the car, but not necessarily the person doing the review. It's the footage that plays over the top of the review and provides visual interest or visual cues based on what's being said. Which is where Michael, our tame camera guy, comes in. Michael usually takes the car somewhere at some point over the weekend, with a shot list given to him by the rest of the team. He'll try and find some pretty scenery and get all of the up-close shots done well ahead of time. Over the years, thanks to our Patreon supporters and many, many kind folks, we've been able to upgrade our camera gear. These days, we have access to a slider, a gimbal, a really good couple of cameras, and a whole bunch of GoPros that can be slapped on a car when needed. But capturing all of that footage takes time, and like most camera shoots, only a fraction of what we actually capture ends up in a review. And sometimes we need 2 people, so we can capture chase car footage. That's footage of the car driving along from the perspective of another car following from behind or leading from in front. This particular type of B-roll is an absolute pain to capture, as it requires finding a nice quiet road and getting pretty close to one another. So while we record this, the 2 cars stay in constant radio contact for safety's sake. While Michael, or one of our other team, is off doing B-roll, I, or whoever else is presenting that review, will work on 4 scripts. An introduction to the car, an outside tour, an inside tour, and a conclusion. These parts are scripted because it helps make sure that we get important facts and figures right, but it also ensures that we get all of our bases covered and give a comprehensive review. We never used to do it like this, but in recent months we've found it helps frame the reviews, even if it makes them longer. But that said, even if those pieces are scripted, nobody tells us what to say in them. Finally, we do one final check for B-roll and one final weather check, and then we'll head off to film those scripted pieces to camera. That's usually pretty quick, an hour or 2, and leaves us just the final in-car footage to capture. Because there's nobody else in the car when we film that, it's often the last thing to be filmed, although obviously by this point we've got a whole laundry list of talking points to cover during the drive. But obviously this part is unscripted because reading off a teleprompter while driving would be unwise and dangerous. Filming any in-car footage takes anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours, and sometimes requires multiple takes. But with 4 cameras running simultaneously, it also takes up a lot of storage space. For motorcycles, it's also slightly different. Because you're often the one wearing the cameras, there's usually more outtakes. You also get more random stares from people if you're filming on a bike with cameras fitted to it for some reason, so that also means having to redo things a whole lot more because people cut in front of you and take photos. Oh, and in case you're curious, we use clip-on lav mics in cars, and then we wedge those same mics inside the foam of our crash helmets when we're filming bike stuff. By the time we're done, we have a whole lot of footage, B-roll, A-roll, sometimes B-roll from the automaker, and audio, and then it's time to offload all of that onto the server. Once there, the person who's editing the review, normally me, backs up the footage to our backup server before we touch it, and then we pre-process the audio ahead of editing the video to make sure it sounds really good, and then import the processed audio and original video files into our editing program of choice, either Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve. From there, it can take a day or two of cutting things together to make sure the review actually sounds and looks good in a rough edit form, and then we send it over to someone else on the team for checking. We actually use a service called Frame.io to share internally with other team members, and when everyone is happy, we send off the video to Winter or Erin, who do the final colouring. That's basically looking at all the footage and making sure that the colouring and lighting is consistent between the cameras as much as we can. We've only just started doing it, but it really changes the final product. That last bit is challenging though, especially with the team split up geographically. For example, our Volkswagen ID4 video had nearly 1.6 terabytes of raw files. And on my rural internet connection, even with Starlink, that's not going to be easy to transfer. So we do it the old-fashioned way, by dumping the raw files onto an SSD that gets overnighted to someone else on the team for checking. With that all done, it's ready to upload and for watching by you. Of course, I have left some stuff out. The frustration of when a car company says no or ignores your request or tells you you're not getting a car because you're not big enough, the fact that a lot of vehicles just aren't available to us, the frustration when a camera or an editing program crashes or damages footage, or the sheer panic when we've got an hour left before the car is due to be picked up and you still haven't finished that one final shot. But for the most part, it's fun. Like I said at the top of this piece, I am extremely lucky. I have a wonderful team of talented folks working with me, and frankly, without them, I don't think I'd be doing this. So next time you watch a review, remember the work that goes into making the video behind the scenes, because I really do just do the easy bit, driving and talking. And frankly, I think I'm reasonably good at both. That's it for today. Please do hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't yet, as it should make sure you don't miss out on our videos. And please do the same to our two other channels, Transport Evolved Take 2, and if you're in a hurry, Transport Evolved Shorts. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, that's Andrew Martin, Guido Drahoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Regine Fellows, Carl Hodgson, Gordon C, Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ueda, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters, John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. You can chat with the team and TE fans over at Discord. We're getting very close to our 1000th Patreon supporter, and we do have some good ideas as to how to celebrate. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.